Hey everybody, welcome to what is my first lesson on the ICN YouTube page. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm very happy that everyone or a ton of people have been involving themselves in chess. And if you're watching this video, then I'm excited that you're here. So this is a relatively beginner video that I'm going to be doing today, and we're going to start off on the most basic level, and then slowly we're going to advance. And what we're going to be talking about today is something incredibly important to end games in particular, and that's something called opposition, right? So just outside of the chess world, when you oppose something, when you're opposite something, which are all parts of the word opposition, it's when you are across from something or when you're against something, you're facing off with something, right? These are just a number of definitions. So in chess, opposition almost always is just between two kings. So like you can see on the board that we have here, these two kings are opposite each other, and they not necessarily have achieved opposition yet, but we're going to look at that right now. So opposition in chess is when a king doesn't move, like king e4 right here. So what's happening is this position is called opposition. White has achieved opposition. And what that means is these three key squares right here in between the king. The white king and the black king are both attacking these squares, but it is obviously black to move here, and black is unable to move to these squares. And this, may not seem as important as it is just yet, but it turns out when there's obviously more pawns and other pieces on the board, but particularly pawns, this grows increasingly more important because this king now has much less options. He has to go to the side, and once he goes to the side, as a white king, if you're trying to go in the direction towards h8, you're cutting off this king even further. So this is the very basic level of opposition, but the way you take it is you are directly opposite the king, right? We see there's two squares here. Another form of opposition is, let's say this king moved over to d6. Right here, if we play king to d4, right? King d4 achieves opposition, but also this move, king f4, technically is a version of opposition, as we are two squares diagonal from this king. And it's a reason it's opposition is because once this king moves again, we'll easily be able to achieve opposition. So right now we're going to go into our first position with more pieces on the board and test this out. So right here, we have white's move. I'm going to give you guys about 5 seconds just to take a look at the position, get a feel for it, and then I'm going to go straight into it. All right, hopefully we have an idea here. This is a pretty simple one. So the white king moves over to d6. Again, we have this two square separation with the black king right here. And now this black king, like I said before, he can't come up to any of these squares. He's forced over. And then hopefully you've calculated our king is going to move to e7. If the black king earlier decided to move to e8, then our white king would go to c7. And we are still controlling all three of these squares now, and it will be easy going, easy travels for this pawn, and then we will be able to checkmate with our king and queen, right? So just to look at that, we take the opposition, the king is forced over, and we're able to make our pawn have this wonderful path. And that's how we don't draw endgames like this. So let's move on to our next position. This one is relatively similar. You may know that if this black king is on the A file, since the pawn is on a side rank, if a white pawn or if a pawn is on the side rank and the opposing king is able to get in front of it, then that is technically a draw, but the king is outside of the pawn in this position. So let's see how we can use opposition. And again, I'll give you guys a couple seconds to take a look at that. All right. Hopefully we calculated king b6. Again, I'm going to keep reiterating it because it's important to understand this point multiple times. So white has taken control of c7, c6, c5. The black king cannot come and enter into the position to get to this key square a8. Maybe he'll try and go to d7. And here we continue to box him out, king b7. Again, these three squares are covered. If the black king tries to come up, yet again, do we have easy travels, easy voyages, easy trips for this pawn, and we will win this endgame quite easily. All right, so let's look at our next position. All right, this position, again, these positions are all a little different, but we're going to, take a few seconds again, see if you can think the opposition. I'm going to give just a little bit more time on this one because we are upping the difficulty a little just to master what opposition is. All right, let's jump right into it. Here, what we have to do is, you'll notice this pawn is on the outside, but the black king looks like he's nearer. But the key thing to realize is, since our pawn is obviously on the second rank, he can jump 2 squares. But that is not what our first step is going to be, because if we jump immediately, this king will be able to catch up our pawn. And now we have a very, very unfortunate draw, which is not what we want. So instead, hopefully you calculated, king goes to d5. We are taking this opposition. This black king cannot move, so his only choice is just move closer to that pawn. Again, we don't want to push a4 because that black king will get to move to b4 and take our pawn, right? a4, king b4. So instead, again, we are going to maintain this opposition, king c5, and if this black king tries to go to the pawn on b2, now we get to use our 2 square maneuver. Take those 2 squares, take that privilege, and just advance straight to a8. And again, easy travels, right? And our pawn, we don't have to play it out. Our pawn will make it to a8, and again, we'll have a very easy queen and king checkmating endgame. All right. So this position, obviously, we've got a white bishop on the board. It's a little different to consider. So I want you guys to take a little time, look at the position, analyze how are we going to make sure that that pawn on c3 can promote, because we know that we cannot win a game with just a king and a bishop. That is a theoretical draw. So let's take a few seconds. All right, so obviously the first thing that hopefully we looked at was that black's next move is going to be king c4, right? To take this pawn on c3. And I think what's neat about this position is that black almost has the opposition here, because he is trapping our white king from going into the position. And if we play a move like king a4 to go back and protect our pawn, this black king is going to get to go to c4. Again, the black king now has opposition. Our king is trapped out. Whoopsies. Our king is trapped out, and this black king will get to take that pawn on c3, and this is a theoretical draw. So how do we stop that? Hopefully you saw this super nifty move, bishop d5, okay? So bishop d5 takes a lot of squares away from this king. You'll notice this king, all these squares that I'm highlighting are protected from the king, except these 2 yellow squares are the only ones that he can go to. Obviously, if our king goes back to d6, we will play c4, and we will be able to win this endgame because we have the extra bishop, so we'll have extra tempo. But here, black's most logical move would be to take our bishop on d5, and it is a sacrifice. This is a sacrifice position, which I think are very exciting. But here, we get this opposition now, right? Here's our big theme. King to b5. We block this king out. When this king moves back to d6, we cannot necessarily play king b6 here because the king will go back, and we can't push our pawn, so we'll need to go backwards. So instead, what we're going to do in this position, once this king goes to d6, is we will indeed push our pawn to c4. And now we have to realize once king goes to c7, it is time to get the opposition once again. And again, we are solidifying these advancing squares for our pawn. This black king is now in trouble. If he goes back, we can just push our pawn, because at this point we have enough tempo to force that king out. Okay, and if you wanted to play it a different way and continue with the opposition, that is perfectly fine as well. We will be able to do that. You take the opposition again, you line up these 3 squares, and this pawn will have a very easy trip to becoming a queen. Okay? So let's take a look at our next puzzle. This one is even a little more trickier, so I'm going to give you guys time on this one as well. Keep in mind, our main goal in this position is to get that pawn on g5 so that our nice pawn pair will have an easy time promoting. So let's take a few seconds to think about that. All right, well, what we have to do, this black king is very trapped. It's important to notice this black king cannot come up to h5 or f5, so he's kind of trapped, and he must stay attached to this pawn in order to keep it. So how we're going to start is go king e4, and if you remember from the very, very beginning of this video, we have this 2 square opposition, which we'll be able to use. If the black king comes to f6, trying to keep us out on these 2 squares, we are simply going to maneuver our way around, right? If the black king goes to e7, now this is very easy. King e5, we take the opposition, and we will take that pawn and have a very easygoing rest of the game. If this black king decides to move to g6, here we take the opposition with our king moving to e6, taking control of these 3 squares. Our king goes to h6, king f6. Remember, this king is trapped. He can't go to h5. His only move is to go h7, and we will take this pawn. And you can choose a number of moves for black, but no matter what, white will be able to outmaneuver with our trick of taking opposition. So if we wanted to try just one more, if this king goes to f7, because the king always has to come back to g5, king e5, king g6, opposition, boom, king h6, king f6. This looks very similar to what we just did. And we will take this pawn, and again, nice voyage. All right, next puzzle, and this will be our last one. So this one takes a little bit more calculating because you can obviously see both kings are pretty far from that pawn. So let's take our 5 seconds again and take a moment to consider this. All right, maybe it was a little more than 5 seconds, but I think this can be a little tricky to think about. So your first inclination may be to just come right up next to that pawn as the white king, get as close as you can. But the problem is we get in trouble ourselves, right? We are forced with opposition. We are forced with opposition. And now this black king has maneuvered himself into a nice position. And if black knows how to play this correctly by staying in front of that pawn and going backwards, and achieving opposition, and then this will end up being a stalemate or a draw. So what we have to do instead, hopefully you calculated that we have to do something called outflanking, which is another idea that we're not going to get very much into, but this king needs to go around the pawn so he is able to reach it in a quicker manner and ensure that he can get on the A file to maintain these B squares. So what am I talking about? You might be asking, well, let's take a look. This white king goes to C2. The black king is going to try and frantically get over to this pawn as fast as possible. And what is going to happen is, since we got to a4, our king is able to advance himself, take this opposition after king b7, king b5, and now the black king is, he's in trouble for sure. We can agree, right? Sorry, not king a6. We're going to take king a7 after king c7. Now our pawn is just going to head on right over to b5 and easily be able to promote in the following moves. So just to look at that one more time, we outflank the pawn, we come around, we take the opposition. If black wants to take the opposition here and play king c7, it's not going to work because we play king a6, we maintain these squares. Black goes king c6, we push again. If black goes king b8, it's exactly what we had before. So hopefully we have a better understanding of opposition. This is just back to our basic position. Opposing the king, this is particularly incredibly useful in endgames with pawns when you're up a pawn and you need to just take those few extra steps to promote that pawn. So hopefully we learned something, and thanks for coming in. Thanks for tuning in for the video. I'll be posting some more, so be sure to check those out. Thanks, guys.